Under the common source epidemics, we have the single exposure or the point source epidemic and the continuous or the multiple exposure epidemic. Under the propagated epidemics, we have person-to-person transmission, arthropod vector or animal reservoir epidemics, and the latest variety we have is the slow epidemics. Before going to the epidemic curve, let us spend some time on the single exposure and the continuous or multiple exposure type of epidemics. Single exposure epidemics are epidemics wherein you have an explosion of cases. There is just a single exposure to the etiological agent. You have an explosion of cases. After that explosion of cases, there are no secondary cases. Okay, so that is basically single exposure epidemic. To give you classical examples of single exposure epidemic would be an unfortunate incident in the history of India, that is Bhopal gas tragedy. Okay, and that is also another example because it is not a classical biological agent explosion. Bhopal gas tragedy was not caused because of a biological agent, but it was caused because of a chemical agent, methyl isocyanate. So that was the causative agent. So what happened was you had just one single exposure to the etiological agent and you had an explosion of cases. After the explosion of cases subsided, there was no secondary waves. Okay, there was no secondary harm after that. So that is common source epidemic. Other example of common source epidemic for day-to-day life would be you go out to a restaurant with your friends, 10 friends go, and the next day you have problem with 8 friends. So 8 out of the 10 friends are ill now. That is simply a single exposure or point source epidemic. Now you can also understand why it is called as single exposure oblique point source epidemic. Okay, because there is only one point of contact to the etiological agent and you have an explosion of cases. The second type is continuous or multiple exposure epidemic. As the name suggests, the diseases are caused by repetitive contact with the etiological agent. So the etiological agent comes in contact with the hosts multiple times. Again, classical example would be your waterborne diseases. A well is contaminated with a bacteria and people draw water from the well on a daily basis. So that is the well they use in that village. So many times people have drawn water from that village on a daily basis and people are continually falling ill. Since people are continually falling ill, you will have a lot of secondary cases. We'll just fast forward to the epidemic curve on the next slide right now. As you can see, this is the epidemic curve. This curve, which is plotted on the x and y axis. On the y axis, it shows the number of cases, and on the x axis is the time. And you can see it's just a curve. So this curve is called as the epidemic curve. Let me also draw this on the board so that I can have some additional manipulations with the curve here. Okay. So this is what we have. Now here is time. Here by a small arrow I have represented the exposure and this is the number of cases. Okay, so this is the number of cases. This type of epidemiological curve is classically found in point source epidemics. Okay, single exposure epidemic, Bhopal gas tragedy, food poisoning. Okay, all of you ate pizza, you are ill. Okay, so this is where you ate pizza. This is where your friends started being ill, and then subsequently more and more number of people joined in. Okay, till this point, and then everybody recovered. So the epidemic is over. There are no secondary waves. There are no secondary waves. This is a epidemic curve that you get in a point source epidemic. Okay, after that, the eatery managed itself and there were no other further infections. On the second type we have is the continuous or multiple source epidemic. Now what happens in a continuous sort of epidemic? I'll show another diagram on a smaller scale. What you'll have is you'll have one peak, and before the peak even subsides you will have a second peak, and before this happens you have a third one. So these ripples will go on and on. Again, example is contaminated well water. First day 10 people fell ill because of that contaminated well water. Second day people used the same well, again fell ill. Third day people again used and again fell ill. So you will have secondary ripples. Sometimes they can give you a very easy MCQ. They can put the epidemic curve in the paper. They can print it and they can ask you what sort of epidemic gives you these kinds of epidemic curve. Again, this is a very easy question if you know what they are talking about. Otherwise, you lose out. So this is very easy. Don't lose. Single exposure, multiple exposure. Common examples would be food poisoning, contaminated well. Okay, so these are the very common examples where you can have. Coming back to the first diagram that we have of the epidemic curve here, there are some additional points that you can have from the epidemic curve. One of the very important points that you can have from here is the exposure, and this is the first case. So I can have this time interval here. Okay, so this gives me the minimum time required for the exposure to produce the disease. This is an important entity but less important to the entity what we are going to discuss next, and that entity would be this one. Okay, this is called as the median incubation period. Okay, median incubation period, as the diagram demonstrates, median incubation period is the time required for 50% of the cases to occur following the exposure to a etiological agent. So this time interval is called as the median incubation period, and this is a very important factor in epidemiology. Many times, if you see microbiology, most of the diagnosis of food poisoning is based upon this time interval. So this is what we want, median incubation period, and this is where we say that Staphylococci has the shortest incubation period. You can have cases as fast as 6 hours because the toxin is preformed and stuff like that. Okay, in microbiology you will learn. This is the very thing that tells us how to determine these numbers. Say Bacillus cereus, you have something else, Streptococci, Staphylococci. These bacteria also have their specific incubation period, and etiologically this is very important. So when the patient comes to you after food poisoning, the first question you ask is, you ask a list of suspected foods, and then you ask how much before the symptoms started did you eat the food. So basically what you are asking is this. Okay, so this is an important entity. This is again something that the curve tells you. It also tells you if it is single source or multiple source. Okay, so some of the MCQs that you can have on the epidemic curve. Then you have propagated epidemics. Propagated epidemics, as the word suggests, are propagated. A lot of people get affected and they go on get affected. So that is what propagation means. Propagation means the proper epidemic, if you may like, that you understand when you say epidemic. This is the one, propagated epidemic, the big one. And then you have the third and the latest one is the slow epidemic. Again, just for your revision, the slide of epidemic curve is showing right now. This is a diagram of propagated epidemic showing on your screen. I would not take the trouble of drawing the diagram on the board because it is fairly complicated, but if you focus on the slide, we have the initiation of the disease here, and then we have a explosion. I'll just run you through the index here. This is the percentage of susceptible population. Here the susceptibility of the population is 100%, as you can see, and this is the population of the immune people. By the time the epidemic dies down, most of the population is immune. In between you have 50-50. 50% is susceptible, 50% is immune. So this is the index. Further, these hollow dots are infected persons who infect others, while as the solid dots are infected persons who fail to infect others. When the infection starts, you see that the immunity is 0 and everybody gets the disease. Most of them can spread the disease. Okay, so you have a explosion. If you see here, this is an explosion, okay, outwards explosion in the initial phase of the epidemic. Nobody is immune, everybody is catching the disease and they are also spreading the disease. Then the epidemic enters to its next stage, the height of the epidemic. Here, many people are already immune to the disease and therefore the spread of the epidemic is checked because already many people have got the disease, so they will not again get the infection and therefore will be able to stop the progress of the disease. So here This is the height of the epidemic. People are rapidly getting immunized against the disease, and slowly this stage will come wherein most of the people are immune to the disease. Now what happens? Wherever the infection goes, it fails to go further because further and further people are immunized. Okay, this again brings us to a very important concept of herd immunity. If I have to say in terms of herd immunity, in the stage of termination of epidemic, the herd immunity of the community has increased. Again, herd immunity is a very important topic. We'll be spending some time on that. But termination of epidemic, why is the epidemic terminating? Herd immunity of the community has increased greatly. Okay. What is herd immunity? Herd immunity is a very important concept in epidemiology. Again, herd immunity simply refers to the number of persons in the population who are immune to a particular disease. Again, we'll draw a basic schema of a diagram just to make you understand of herd immunity. Say these are individuals who are all susceptible to the disease at the start of an epidemic. Slowly the disease spreads, as we saw in the propagated epidemic, and the disease enters into the phase of termination of epidemic. At this stage what happens is most of them have already got the disease, they are cured, and therefore they are now immunized against the disease. Slowly, this is the height of the epidemic, shall we say. Many people are still susceptible, many people have got the disease, and then slowly what happens is the epidemics grows so much that most of the population are immunized to the disease. At this stage what happens is that these people find it very difficult to give the disease further because they lack a host. Say for example, this person, he can't give the disease to this guy because he is already immunized. He can't pass the disease to this person also because he is also already immunized. He has got the disease, so will not get the disease the second time. Again problem, and you see this person fails to transmit the disease to anybody. So this stage wherein most of the people in a community have got the disease is basically herd immunity. Many people have got the disease further fails to transfer. This is called as herd immunity. This, although the concept is very lucrative, is a difficult concept in reality because all the diseases have various proportions of herd immunity that will stop their transmission. For example, very recently there is a report that it takes about 90 to 95% of herd immunity for the transmission of polio to stop. Now 95% is a ridiculous figure. You mean to say that 95% of the population should be immunized against polio to stop the transmission? If I have to do that on the board, it should look something like this. Okay, so almost 100%. So what you are asking me is basically immunize everybody to stop the transmission. On the other hand, there are few diseases which do not need such a high case of herd immunity to stop transmission. How this is calculated is again very complicated, not on our checklist, so we'll not go there, but remember herd immunity per se is an important concept. This is what herd immunity is. Majority of the people are already immunized or they have got the disease dies down. Coming back to the slide, termination of epidemic, this is what has happened. This shaded area here is showing the herd immunity and the disease then automatically dies down. The latest thing, long-term or secular trends. This is the most recent type of epidemic that we have observed. Now as I said, epidemic by definition is more than expected. Epidemic does not say that you would have to have a burst of cases. Epidemic simply says more than expected. Long term of secular trends, if I have to draw it, I have very little space, but if you take a scale of not days, not weeks, not months, but years together, say for example this was 2001, 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you have to plot the prevalence of chronic diseases, say for example hypertension. If I plot the chart for hypertension here, the line would be something like this. Okay, so although the line is not jump starting like this, the line has a definitive inclination, and that definitive inclination is surely above. So these diseases like hypertension, diabetes, trachoma in many parts of the world are slowly increasing. We are failing to control these diseases, and although you don't see a burst of disease, but you surely see a trend in this disease, and that trend is unfortunately upwards. So as we are controlling communicable diseases, life expectancy of people is increasing. They are living long enough to have diseases like hypertension and diabetes and die due to these non-communicable diseases. So therefore, because of all these factors, you see that they are showing an upward trend. This also is an epidemic. Why? Again, strictly speaking, trend is upwards and it is more than expected. Every year, the burden of the disease is growing. So it shows a definitive trend, and therefore, this is a new type of epidemic which we call as secular trend or long-term epidemic. Again, this is the odd one out if you ask me. This is not the regular MCQ that you have. Hypertension, you say there is no epidemic of hypertension, but yes, it is a type of epidemic, and this is why we call it as an epidemic. Just keep that in mind because this can be an odd one out. Next, we come to the place distribution. Just to remind you, for those of us who have lost track, we are describing descriptive epidemiology. We just discussed time distribution and we are discussing place distribution. So that is where we are in the bigger picture. In place distribution, we have to know where the disease occurs. Like time distribution, obviously place distribution is very important. A couple of lectures before, I had drawn a rough schema of the cholera typhoid in London. So that was Golden Square, London. I had drawn a rough schema. I have a better diagram of spot map to show you how spot mapping is done today. It gives us the knowledge on disease pattern, and there are lots of place distributions. You need not learn this classification, but you need to know that diseases have a specific pattern. International variations, if we have to give some examples, you would have examples of CS stomach, oral and uterine cervix. Now uterine cervix and oral cancers are disproportionately higher in the Indian population. So if you are appearing for the MCI screening test, this is something high yield for you. Okay, uterine cervix in Indian females is disproportionately high. Oral cancer in Indian males is disproportionately high. Okay. Then you have national variations also. National variations for endemic goiter, latherism, fluorosis, guinea worm and malaria. Most of these diseases, if you see, are predominantly rural in nature. Having said that, I should caution you now that these diseases in a day were rural. Nowadays, because of increased migration, these diseases are more and more coming to the urban population. Notable examples would be malaria and leprosy. Malaria was once very much a rural disease. Because of the migration, malaria is now a urban disease. Same goes true for leprosy also. Leprosy was almost eradicated from the urban areas of India, but it is coming back now because of the widespread migration that we have. Endemic goiter would not follow the rules that the rest followed. Endemic goiter is basically widespread. You have these goitrogenic belts here and there in India. The Himalayan ranges is a specific goitrogenic belt. Now, why is the goiter so much prevalent in the Himalayan regions? What is the chief source of iodine? The chief source of iodine, at least for us, is the soil and the seawater. And you see that because of the proximity to the sea, the land near the sea has got increased rates of iodine. As you go higher and higher, the soil is depleted in iodine. So people who are living at higher altitudes will have less of iodine into their crops. So when you eat your food, you have less of iodine and therefore you have more of goiter. So height, living on an altitude is directly proportional to having goiter. Again, our association. Does altitude cause goiter? There is a definitive association. But altitude does not cause goiter. Iodine deficiency causes goiter. Living on an altitude depletes the iodine levels of the soil and therefore you have goiter. So endemic goiter is also very much prevalent and this is the reason why. You also have on a small scale rural urban variation. Like I said, chronic bronchitis, accidents, lung cancer and mental illnesses. Many of them are urban problems. Rural problems would be snake bite, heat cramps, okay, then infections. These are basically rural predominant diseases. So just by having a look at the geographical pattern of the disease also you get a lot of knowledge about the disease. Local distributions best studied by spot maps.